and welcome back to the latest edition of The Doctor Will See You Now. I have met the author in question today on a radio show, and we listened to her favourite music, and we chatted about her series that she's got. But today we're going to talk about, well, it's a disturbing read. That is really what it's all about, and it's a cracking read. And I would say, bear with it as the scene is set, because what you then find out, well, it should leave a considerable mark upon you when you read this. So, without further ado, no, totally. Welcome, if you will, everybody, A.A. Chaudhuri into the consultation room.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a
pleasure to be here.
It's absolutely wonderful, because what I always think about your writing, so this is 3 books now that you know, getting to know you as an author, as a writer, you know, because I always think the way somebody writes and who they are, you know, they are different manifestations maybe, and all sorts of things like that, because knowing the way you write, I would hate to think that was who you were, as in that sense of twisted.
A lot of people say that they're quite surprised at what I write, because they know what I'm like as a person. I assure you, I'm nothing like the people in my books.
yeah, and how wonderful! I mean, what an amazing skill and talent to not write self. You know, because I think very often, especially, you know, that tenet of write what you know. You know, it's one of the things that comes out time and time again. And yet, to have an imagination that can create characters like this and a storyline like this, you know, that is cracking writing. So what we're discussing then today, or the novel that we'll be discussing, is your latest, She's Mine, published by Hera. It's coming out soon. So please, people, watch out for that, and get yourself a copy. Thriller writing. If I might call you Alex as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, everyone calls me Alex. Yeah, I much prefer that.
So, Alex, thriller writing. You coming to this point in your life. Why thriller writing?
Well, I've always enjoyed thrillers. I mean, crime fiction, right from when I was an early teenager, was my favorite genre. I remember picking up The Firm by John Grisham and just being absolutely, you know, engrossed, and I couldn't put the book down. Everything about it, you know, the suspense, the twists, the turns, the red herrings, sort of challenging me as a reader as well as the author. I just find it such a challenging genre. And I just knew I wanted to write thrillers myself. There's so much to them, I find. You know, it's all, I mean, I'm quite having been a lawyer as well, you know, I'm very much into, you know, constructing, you know, a plot or a case, you know, that kind of the steps that you have to take to create a good thriller. And I just really enjoy everything about the crime genre. I think it's just really, you know, it just gets me hooked and gripped by the page. So I wanted to write one myself, basically. Yeah.
Okay, so that coming into the moment of being published, because you have a series, and we'll talk about that series just for a little bit, but that moment of being published, how long did it take for those initial ideas to have taken root and here are those publications?
So, as you know, The Scribe was published in 2019, but I actually started writing in 2009.
Okay.
So it took me 8 or 9 years to get my publishing deal. So I have to say, you know, it was long. It was at times heartbreaking, but also very character building. I started writing women's fiction in 2009. I had an idea for a women's fiction novel, and back then my son, he was just a toddler, and I was pregnant with my second child. But I really felt the time was right for me to start writing. I'd always wanted to write, but I'd been a lawyer that I didn't really have the time, and I knew by my first maternity leave I didn't really want to go back to law. It really wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't creative enough for me, and I knew this was my moment, and luckily I was able to do that. My husband was very good in allowing me to give it a go. So I started writing a women's fiction novel, which was about a sort of disgruntled city worker who leaves the rat race, obviously, not based on life events or anything. And she goes off to Italy when her Italian cousin asks her to help open a restaurant. And it's a bit of mystery, a bit of romance. And the reason I wrote that was because I really didn't have time to do the research that's required with crime novels. So obviously crime novels takes meticulous planning. And I started submitting to agents. I thought, I've written a really good book. I was so naive. I didn't realize what it took to get published, that there are thousands of writers. It's very subjective. And I got, loads of rejections. And then I ended up self-publishing. So that was over the space of 2 years. And then I had an idea for a legal thriller, which I wrote. And then it took me another 2 years to get my agent, Annette Crossland, having had many rejections. So yeah, it took me 5 years to get Annette. And then it took another 3 years to get my first contract with, which was Endeavour Press then, which is now Loom Books, when James Factor took the scribe on. So yes, it was a long journey, but I learned a lot along the way, and I just kept writing a book every year to keep me going, because my love of writing kept me going. That was the thing. I didn't love law like I love writing, and the passion for writing keeps you going.
And can I just say, you can see that the way you talk about those aspects of your life, that there's the light comes on when you talk about writing. And I just think, to have not given up, I think it would have been so easy to think, well, nobody wants this, I don't know what to do, how do I do it? But the tenacity, to do that, it's fabulous.
I mean, I've worked in industries that require you to be tenacious. And as you know, I was a tennis player before, and that's quite a cutthroat environment. But I have to say, writing, it seems, was the most arduous in a way, because you're so passionate about your books and your baby, and you think you put so much effort into it, and it's hard to take the rejections, but then you have to know that it's not a personal thing. One person's may like one book, and it's not another person's cup of tea. So you just have to know it's nothing wrong with my book as such. It's just not what that publisher wanted at that time, and you just have to keep telling yourself that. And I never got comments like, oh, she can't write. It was like, oh, she writes really well, it's just not right for this time, or something like that. So, and Annette, I owe a lot to my agent for really keeping my spirits up and saying, don't worry, it'll happen, it's just a matter of time, just hang in there. And that's what I did.
So it's a bit, like going back to tennis, that idea of having a trainer who believes in your game and your skill, and knows that you keep in there, you keep playing those games. It's one day it's going to be your day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, again, thank you for sharing with us about that, about Annette, the value of an agent, for an author, to get to a certain place, to make
absolutely.
it, and
to keep believing in you, and keep putting your book out there. I really owe a lot to her for that, and she's a very good friend as well. So I'm very lucky.
I love these stories. They're so heartwarming, because as you quite rightly say, I think publishing, it's never been easy, but I think it's getting harder. And the idea that finding the readers, because they do exist, as you say, my book might not be right for you, but I know it's going to be right for other people. And when publishers won't take a chance on something different, there's like the latest, whatever the groove might be,
the
you know.
latest trend. Yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's important, not, you have to write what comes to you and not
Mm,
try and fit it to what, because I think that comes through in the writing. I think,
yeah.
if you're trying to fit something that's supposed to be in vogue, it's not going to come across as
Mm,
genuine and
yeah.
authentic.
Yeah. Not if it's, yeah, not if it's not what's coming from within, then
Mm,
definitely not. And I have to say, I think that is something that is at the heart of what you do. You know, it's like this is my writing. These are the stories I want to tell, and
yeah.
if you want to read them, you're welcome.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely. I mean, with the Kramer and Carver thrillers, obviously I was a lawyer, so I could use my experience of that environment and having, socialized with other lawyers. I knew what it took to be a lawyer and what the atmosphere was like, and I hope that comes through in the books. Um, and obviously, I mean, I don't know if you know, but the scribe is actually based on my time at the College of Law. I mean, when I studied the 7 legal subjects that are pivotal to the plot, that's how the idea came to me, because I studied those subjects. So yeah, I think it's important to just go with what comes to you, and do the best you can. You can't ask for anything more than that.
Now, so taking an idea, giving it everything, doing it the best you can. Let's turn now then to She's Mine, a standalone.
Yeah.
And so first of all, you know, I hope it's not the end of your series. By the way, I hope you will be coming back with
No,
more.
I did actually. I've actually 50,000 words into a new Kramer, but I had to put it down
Mhm,
uh, for my edits for She's Mine,
mhm,
and I'm also due to write another psychological thriller for Hera. So,
mhm.
but it will come there. It will be there,
Yeah.
because you haven't seen the last of them. That's for sure.
Woo! That is very, very exciting. Wonderful, wonderful. But why? Why a standalone? What took you to this, you know, this style, this format?
Well, I mean, psychological thrillers. I mean, even with Kramer and Carver, you probably noticed I quite like exploring the psychology of the human mind, although they feature, a police officer and an amateur sleuth, on the chase for the culprits. I also write things from the view of the killer, the kidnappers, the victims, because I'm really interested in the human mind, and what motivates people, the kind of motivations, past events. I always attracted to the idea of the psychological thriller, and what motivates people, what in their past, what events in their past can cause them to behave in the way they do. Because I think, we as human beings are all, when none of us are infallible human beings, we can all be tempted by the darker side of human nature. And I think that's what resonates with the reader, because they're thinking to themselves, actually, that could happen to me. I can see why that might happen. So I think that's very effective, and I think it really draws the reader in
Mhm.
from that perspective.
I totally agree with you, and I think the way that you write, as I say, I think there's the what would I do? Would I do that? Would you
Yeah.
know? Is you know? Gosh, maybe in a certain circumstance that could have happened. It might have been me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like the way you challenge us, all the while we're trying to actually figure out who, how, why. You
Yeah.
know, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So the whole idea then of a child being kidnapped, it's a very difficult, you know,
It is
subject
a really
matter. Wait,
difficult subject.
were
Yeah.
you? Has there ever been a moment, you know, before it came into being when you thought, you know, I think I should step away from this. This is too
It was
dark.
really difficult to write, especially being a mother myself.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
think, the idea just came to me. I mean, I started writing this book in April 2017, so it's quite a while ago. And I just thought, my worst nightmare is something happened to my children.
Yeah.
So I knew that I would be able to portray her grief and her loss authentically, because that's how I would feel.
Mm,
But it was because it's not just about that. It's not just, and we know what happened. You've read the books, you know what happens. That it was easier to deal with, as it were, because you know how the story pans out. So, you know, whereas books like, I suppose, the Lovely Bones and books like that, you know, it's a different type of book. So it's not just about the child abduction, it's about a lot more than that, and the other characters and how they feel and what's happened to them. So that allowed me to write it without, you know, without feeling too traumatized.
So, did you, after writing a chapter or two, maybe, that sense of, I just need to go away and, but of course, as you say, it's about so much more than that, without wishing to trivialize, that aspect. And what you just said just now, that and the different people's points of view.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be a bit tricky, bringing in, so many different people's voices. Why did you feel that this was the right way to tell the story?
Well, I wanted to do it in the first person as well, rather than the third person, because I think, again, that brings the reader closer to the character. You know, they really can then get inside their heads and feel the emotions that they're feeling. So it was quite important for me to put it in the first person, because I think you definitely get closer to the character then. And I wanted to make the reader think that they all had something to hide, and they knew things that maybe the other characters didn't know, and they were teasing each other, and one character's wondering what the other one's thinking, and it just to sort of cause that feeling of claustrophobia and suspicion as to who's telling the truth and who's hiding what. I think if it was all just from one person's point of view, you wouldn't be able to show all of that, because it wouldn't be natural. Christine couldn't know what Ella's thinking in her mind or what she's planning. So I think it was important for me to do that. And I hope it's not, confusing. That's why I have them addressing each character, so it's quite clear who they're talking to. And I think just addressing a character in the narrative gives more of a sinister atmosphere to it. And it's like, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're up to. That kind of, deviousness of it comes across. And I think that's what a reader wants in a psychological thriller. They want to feel a bit disturbed. They want to feel unsure of who's telling the truth and who's hiding things.
Yeah, and that menace that's there of, if the truth comes out, what will the repercussions be? So yeah, definitely.
And of course, we as the reader know some things that some characters don't, and we're sort of thinking to ourselves, when they're going to find out. We know what it is, but
and when they do find out,
well, what are they going to think when they find out the truth? That kind of thing, which hopefully keeps you turning the pages.
Oh yeah. So, but let's just focus. And again, I know we can't give things away. We must not. But if we can focus on Christine Donovan, tell us as much as you can about her, and it's a question I love to ask authors before you put your fingers on the keyboard. Was Christine Donovan there, already in waiting, or did she develop as you went into the writing of the story?
She did. I mean, I had an idea of her. I had an idea of the key characters, but I didn't know her in great detail. I never do that with any of my books. I know authors, they work in very different ways, and I am not a detailed, chapter by chapter planner. That's not the way I write. I start writing, and then new ideas, aspects of the personalities occur to me as I write. Often, the culprit or the end isn't even how I thought it might be at the beginning, because new ideas will occur to me. But she definitely, I had the bare bones of her. I knew she'd be a woman she'd be in her mid-50s. She obviously she used to be a lawyer herself. She's married to Greg, and before she had her first child, she was, a career woman. She couldn't imagine having children. She was very, very driven. And then she had her child, and her child was suddenly the most important thing to her, and that's why her grief is so pronounced for her neglect, and also because of the secret she's hiding. And because she feels guilty, she pushes Greg, her husband, away, and her other two children that she had later on, because she can't bear to feel the same grief that she feels for her firstborn were something to happen to them. That's her way of dealing with things. And she over exercises, she starves herself as a way of maintaining control over her life. And that's basically, you know, she's a woman completely tormented by what's happened.
I know. I think, you know, Christine's guilt, I mean, is magnified massively. But I wondered as I was reading, you know, the guilt that so many women feel, you know, the pull between career, family, should I be this? How do I be a good mum? What is it to be a good mum? What is it to be a good wife? You know, all those questions and the guilt that's with it. And it all felt that, you know, it was encapsulated in Christine's character, but with this much bigger weight on, you know, my child, you know, my child has gone. And with that, then, you know, calling into question my ability as a mother.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think all women, you know, when they get to a certain stage, I mean, when they're over 40, and there's so many demands on their time. I mean, you have elderly parents, you have the bills, you have children, you know, there's so much going on, and you just sometimes feel like you can't see the wood for the trees. But then of course Christine has this other added pressure on her, and it's like a ticking time bomb. And that's why she becomes addicted to exercise and going to therapy, because it's her way of dealing with things. It's her only outlet, really.
I, the other thing as well, recently I spoke to another author where the idea of a marriage that, you know, for whatever reason isn't functioning. And I just wonder, you know, are we at a place where we can actually, as women, and I don't normally like to do the gender thing, but I just wonder, is it, as you know, as women, are we in a place now where we can actually, you know, we can say this isn't working. This isn't right. And why isn't it right? And what do we need to do to try and make these things right?
Yeah. No,
Yes.
I agree, but I don't think it's still not easy for women at all. I mean, I remember when I got pregnant with my first child, and there was no question of me going part-time or even leaving the office at 6 o'clock at night, you know, which just seemed really unfair, because I was decent at my job, you know, but it was either take it or leave it. There was no happy medium, really. And so you have a choice, you know, your career or your family. It's still a really tough. I think things are changing, but we've still got a fair way to go.
Without a doubt, I think what is always interesting in these things is we seem to make progress, some steps forward, and then of course there's always a resistance.
Yeah.
You know, those hard won battles, or that hard won progress is often threatened. You know, and I do wonder, you know, given what the pandemic has meant for the way we approach life.
I was just thinking that, actually. It just occurred to me as we were talking. I was thinking, hopefully, you know, one good thing out of this whole thing could be that, you know, women are given more flexibility and you know, because we've proved that we can work from home. You know, exactly. It's not ideal, but it can be done. And I think even it's allowed men to do that. I know my husband, you know, his boss didn't like him working from home. You know, he had a real bee in his bonnet about it. But now they're going to probably do a 3-day week. So yeah, so there's some positives.
Without a doubt. Now the time frame, there's 2 time frames in this story, and they're 23 years apart. And I know, you know, I'm always fascinated by numbers, and I never know whether authors just, you know, stick a random pen in you know, in a list of dates. Why 23 years? What did that time frame allow you to do?
Well, so when Heidi is taken, she's 2 years old. So the 23 years allowed me to make it her 25th birthday when she receives the note to say that she's still alive. So that it seemed like a more impactful time, to that the that the abductor would be sending the note on the anniversary of her 25th birthday. So that was the reason, really. So it was like a memorable date.
Yeah, definitely. I also felt as well, you know, again, the difference in society in 23 years, you know, things have, you know, since the
Well,
end of,
technology, for example,
yeah,
obviously, you know, as we know, when she loses Heidi, she's on the phone, and she's on a Nokia phone, and she's quite unusual in having that phone, because, you know, they weren't commonplace in the late 90s. But you see how technology has changed the way the investigation progresses, the way, you know, the police inspector that comes in both areas. So yeah, you have to think about that when you're writing. You know, it's very easy to think, oh, she'll have, you know, an iPhone on her, but of course she won't. So, you know, things like that initially probably hadn't occurred to me, and I had to go back and think, oh, actually that's the late 90s. You know, people didn't have iPhones, and, you know, they didn't use email so much even. It was, so you have to think about those things, definitely.
Yeah, and that, you know, again, that's wonderful, that the development, as it were, that we see of then, you know, and now, the two different,
and even with, you know, I think it's made the point that, you know, there was no Facebook when Heidi was taken, so they didn't have the intrusion in that sense, but they still had the intrusion of the investigation. But you know, no Facebook, no social media, whereas these days, you know, you'd have to allow for that. So.
And it's really tricky, isn't it? And, you know, I don't want to say too much about, but I mean, it raised with me, you know, the sad case of Madeleine McCann, and the media circus with that, and you know, and people making judgments and things, and I really, you know, I found myself trying not to make judgments about Christine and things like that. I think it's, you know, it's easy for us to, you know, oh well, I wouldn't, or it wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, she also knew, didn't she, that, you know, having been, you know, an attractive female lawyer, that a successful couple, the intrusion was bad enough, but, you know, without the addition of any kind of scandal, would have made their lives unbearable, and for their other children as well. So that's what she's traumatized by. You know, she wants to let the secret out, but she's also aware of how it will affect other people, and, you know, potentially destroy lives.
Yeah,
so that's the dilemma.
Yeah, that are already in such a bad state as it is, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, I have to ask you about this, because I seem to be discussing this more and more with authors, and I wonder what it is, the notion of writing characters that are amazing, but we might not like them.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, gosh, do you take a chance as an author to say, I am going to write this character as I see them, and you might not warm to them, and, you know, or you might not like them, you might not root for them, but I can't not be true to the way that I want to write.
Yeah,
it's a risk to take.
It is, because a lot of readers, that, you know, a common comment is, oh, there were no likable characters, I didn't relate to any of them, you know. But I think maybe in certain genres you do have, you know, in a rom-com, or you obviously want to have likable characters, you know, you want to be able to connect with them, and in police procedurals as well, because you want to be in the corner of the policeman or the amateur sleuth. You know, you want to like them, because you're going along the investigation with them, and you want them to succeed. But in something like a psychological thriller, I don't agree really that you have to have all likable characters, because it's about the motivations and the menace and what's driving them. I think as long as they're interesting and intriguing, that's what's important, and that's where characterization is so important, and, you know, bringing out the little idiosyncrasies in each character to make them stand out from each other. And I think that's really important with a psychological thriller.
Yeah, because it's not as if, you know, I'm thinking like, you know, my neighbours on you know, on the street. Yeah, I'm picking up a book to read. I don't have to like them. I don't have to like the people that live on my street. It's not, you know, it's I want to read a story that pulls me in, you
Yeah.
know, and takes me all over the place, and in the end makes me think, oh God, really?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah. And I like the distinction you make, because I think, yeah, for certain, you know, for certain genre, yeah, maybe you do have to say, oh yeah, come on, you know, come on, Sergeant, whatever, you can
Yeah.
do this, you got this, but not in this kind of writing.
Absolutely. And even then, you don't want them to be all, you know, completely goody two shoes, do you? You want there to be something about them that's not right, because nobody is perfect. We've all got flaws.
Yeah,
So I think that would be unrealistic in many ways.
exactly that. So that the way you take us into the dark side, as you said, you know, that shadow side of humanity,
Mm,
the decisions that we make to do certain things, or the decisions that we make to not do certain things.
yeah.
Yeah, and
And the way our past or our childhoods could affect us as well, you know. It's like Dan and Ella, they're very quite twisted individuals because they feel they've been neglected by their mother since birth, and it's made them suspicious and resentful. And, you know, I don't think they're, you know, particularly bad. They weren't born bad, but circumstances have shaped their personalities that way, you
so
know.
and very often it's simply self-preservation.
Yeah,
It's protection, isn't it? It's like
yeah, absolutely. And you do see Ella, you know, she realizes her faults, you know, towards the end, and she admits them, and she, you know, I don't want to say too much, but
oh,
she but, you know, I wouldn't say that, you know, they're all bad. I think they have some redeeming qualities which come through.
yeah, definitely, yeah. It's important that people don't think you've just created a catalogue of monsters.
Yes.
It's not true at all. No. Now, tell us about the setting, the location. Where, you know, where have you set the story?
So it's set mainly in North London, and so Christine and Greg live in St John's Wood in a very nice townhouse. I was actually, I lived in North London for about 12 years. So, I mean, I went to university in London, I studied there, and I lived with 5 other girls for about 4 years in a flat together. And then I bought my own place in sort of Queen's Park, and then with my husband in Kilburn. So I know that area really well. So I feel able to write about it quite authentically. And of course, Christine and Greg, they're quite well to do, they're middle class, they're both lawyers. So St John's Wood seemed the right sort of setting for me to put them in. And yeah, I mean, London is, as I said, I'm familiar with London. That's where I set my Kramer and Carver books as well. So I think it's a city that everyone can relate to, you know, people from all over the world. They may not have been to London, but they know of London, and it's something that's they're familiar with. So I can picture things in my mind, you know, the streets, the cafes, the tube stations. And so it was something where I naturally wanted to set it, really.
And because I think again, for me, it was, you know, that the class aspect of, you know,
Yeah,
of this family, that you know, this isn't what a working class family. This isn't a family who struggle with,
yeah,
you know, with, I don't know, financially or things like that. But this is a family who on the, you know, on the front really should have very perfect existence.
absolutely. Yeah, no money worries, perfect existence, but it shows that bad things can happen to, you know, money doesn't make you happy, you know. And I think that's the thing, it's just things that can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter what your class is, you know, you're not immune to these things.
Yeah, definitely. That, you know, the good jobs, status, you know, as you say, these aspects just bubble away regardless.
Yeah,
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 there's total equality
yeah.
where these things are concerned.
And I think there's one scene when Daniel the son walks in and he picks up the family photo, doesn't he, on the mantelpiece, and says, oh, no one would believe, you know, how messed up we are behind that rosy picture.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how, you know, Ella, she puts on this mockney accent because she almost wants to disassociate herself with this middle class upbringing, because she doesn't, you know, she doesn't want to be associated with it. She wants to break away because she feels, you know, almost claustrophobic under that setting.
Yeah, she's not the only one. I thought you created that sense in the text as well. Yeah. Can we breathe? Can we breathe? Now I've got two questions to bring to a close our discussion on She's Mine. And the first thing is to ask you again, I hope you can tell us because it might be an aspect that you can't disclose. But what was the aspect of She's Mine that you are just absolutely thrilled about? You know, what's the aspect of this that makes you think, yes?
The end.
Yeah.
The last few pages.
Yeah.
I think the sort of twist towards the end is, you know, I'm pretty chuffed about thinking that up, and sort of the misleading aspect of it. So that's my
Not that you're a devious person in your own right. Is that
I know it's pretty shocking, I know, but I just, and that actually, you know, we were talking about, do you have it planned before? That actually came to me as I wrote. I didn't know that was what was going to happen at the end. I wasn't quite sure of the ending, and that suddenly popped into my head, and I thought, that's sort of the killer. That's the killer twist. So, and that's, you know, my publisher, that's what they loved about the book as well, you know.
Great. Yeah, and so people have to read it to find out what that twist is.
Yes, make you read to the end.
Yeah, and the other part that I always, you know, so there's the aspect that says, oh, I did this, is mine, I did this, and then the other aspect is just where you may not have done, and I really hope you didn't, but where is it in, you know, in the book where, or in the process of writing, where you felt that you were either in treacle or banging your head against a brick wall?
Gosh, I think just making sure that I was deceiving the reader enough and throwing them off track, and that required me to sort of change the characters a bit and their motivations. And yeah, it's really hard to describe actually. There wasn't a moment where it just kind of flowed, to be honest, most of the time.
So you were never at a point where you...
No, I wasn't really. I mean, I wanted there were certain aspects, weaker aspects that I improved to make more twists that I put in, another narrative, you know, things like that. But I never found that I was sort of, I wrote it quite quickly actually. I never really stumbled at any point.
Yeah,
not that I didn't require a lot of you know, I honed it and perfected it over many months. You know, the things I added made better characterization, but the basis of the story
it was
flowed quite quickly.
Are you an author who enjoys an edit, or do you think, oh, here we go, it has to be done, so I'm just going to do it?
Depends how many edits there are. No, I don't mind it actually. I don't, as long as I have enough. I mean, Keshini was amazing. I feel so fortunate to have an editor like her. I mean, she's so understanding, and so, you know, luckily there wasn't a huge amount of editing to be done, but you know, the advice that she gave me was absolutely invaluable, and I've learned so much. And from that point of view, it was a really interesting learning curve, and I think it will help me for my next book, definitely. So yeah, I mean, it does drive you a bit insane when you're reading it for the 50th time, and especially when you get the page proofs and it's really tiny and just like reading it word for word, and you start getting word blind. But I quite enjoy the challenge of making it better, making it tighter. I think, you know, it's quite a rewarding process in that sense.
Because to me, I think it's one of those aspects of writing that makes the difference. You know, because a story is a story. And that basic aspect has to be good to start with.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, that polishing that then makes it.
I mean, there's so many things that you don't realize until sometimes you don't pick up until the 20th, and you think, how did I not notice that? You know, I've read this so many times, and then it suddenly occurs to you, and And that's really satisfying and a relief when you think, gosh, I'm glad I noticed that before it went out to the public. So it's a really important aspect of putting a book out there. It's absolutely invaluable.
Totally, totally. Well, the consultation time. That wasn't so painful, was it? Yeah.
No, it was, I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
I get to a point where it's like, oh, I'm really sorry that we have to draw, conversations to a close, but I know we do time and everything.
It was lovely to have the chat because I haven't really talked about this book yet because, it's not out yet. And it was just really nice to talk about it and talk about the themes and my motivations for it. So thank you for asking me.
It's a
great questions.
A total pleasure, and I'm really grateful to be able to to have had a journey through the book.
Thanks for reading it. Thanks for making the time. Really
and as I say, it was a tricky read, but that was good.
Yeah.
I like the moments.
Yeah.
You know how to make a reader feel, so that's good.
Thank you. Good. Thanks.
I wish you all the very best with She's Mine, and I look forward to when, in some format or another, we can be in conversation again. So
thank you,
Alex. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jackie. Thank you.
A pleasure. Bye.
Bye.